All right, for this summon bug, it impacts advanced search and specifically affects users who use advanced search heavily and go back and forth into advanced search to refine their search rather than using the facets on the screen. In this case, what happens if we're in advanced search, a user can construct a search that has multiple lines, and when we start off, everything seems okay. But what happens is, when I do the initial search, Summon combines the terms in a typical fashion. Here we've got the search up here. Communism is a subject term, and I'm using all fields for Soviet Union in 1917. And when I input this search on the advanced search page, it occupied 3 lines. Subject terms in the first, Soviet Union in the second, 1917 in the third. Now, if the user goes back to the advanced search at this point, you'll notice that 1917 and Soviet Union still occupy the second and third line. But the first line becomes the combined search. So Soviet Union and 1917 have both been stuffed up into the first line along with the subject term communism. So if at this point I make some other changes, let's say I want to make this a geographic location, and then I submit my search again, you'll see that this keeps growing longer and longer. So I go in my advanced search, here's subject terms, communism. Subject terms has now been stuck in there twice, and subject terms now embraces Soviet Union and communism. And this is particularly problematic because the users that we saw, and I'd say of the 11 users that we tested, at least 4 or 5 of them got stuck at some point with this. But every time you go back into advanced search, it re-adds these lines to the first line. And you can see how complex the search is getting up here in the URL that's being passed to Summon. And it just keeps getting crazier and crazier. And eventually, it's very easy for certain users, depending on how they structured their limiters in the advanced search, to wind up with 0 results. And the students seem to be very confused by this. They don't notice what's going on up here most of the time. Only one of my 11 users noticed that Summon was, as she put it, it's keeping all this code. And it seems rather strange that it's doing 2 things. That number one, it is grabbing everything and combining it into a single line and encasing that in whatever the limiter was chosen, but also that it keeps the second and third line. So for all intents and purposes, it appears that nothing has really changed except for this top line, but the top line keeps accreting further and further things. And as users do this, continue their search to continue to refine their search, things just get kind of weirder and weirder. And I'm not quite sure what the reasoning is behind this, whether it would be one thing if it always concatenated all of the terms, and then when you went into advanced search, it left these blank, in which case it would be either just adding new terms to the search, but to always add all the terms back into this first search box is very confusing for users and works sort of cross purposes. And I don't know what could be done in this case, whether you could just preserve the original intent, which would seem to make the most sense, or to have the old search combined in one box and then to clear out the other boxes to indicate that these fields have been subsumed or concatenated into this top field. But I saw one particular user basically managed to nest 5, 6, 7, I think, iterations into his search because of this particular issue in Summon. So again, and for us, we've made the advanced search button a little more prominent, but I've seen users use the advanced search even when it's not as prominent as this. And those users that do prefer the advanced search interface sort of get penalized because this just gets all very weird on them very quickly. So again, basically, if you start off with a multi-line advanced search, it's going to concatenate all of the search terms from the lower lines into the first while keeping the ones that are after the first line, and then just keep adding that to the first one. And things get very, very complicated very quickly in this case.